Here we go, guys. So we're going to get started with our short passage with our pronunciation, usage, punctuation, and sentence structure. Okay. The bubble rafting snails, janthinids, drift for miles, moving up and down, feeding on jellyfish and other floating prey. So our first question is, right here, moving up and down, is that appropriate? The writer wants to emphasize that janthinids move by drifting passively under the surface of the water. Passively. They're not actively swimming. Given that all the choices are true, which one best accomplishes this goal? There are bubbles peeking through the water surface, wherever the water and wind take them, often in groups that travel together. So the right answer here is wherever the water and wind take them. So basically, they're moving passively. These bubble rafting snails drift for miles wherever the water and wind take them, feeding on jellyfish and other floating prey. So the right answer to 47 is C. Okay. They use mucus to create a small raft of tiny air bubbles permanently attached to the bottom of their bodies, which makes them float in that way. Okay. This is a very awkward construction here. You could say which makes them float, because you've already explained what they're doing. In that way is completely unnecessary and very awkward. So float alone might be an answer, but this is clearly wrong. So let's see. Float, so therefore they feed on prey and also float. No, that's redundant, right? You're saying the same thing over and over again. Like jellyfish and other buoyant prey they feed on. No, you're adding all kinds of extra stuff that's unnecessary. Buoyant. Buoyant means you float. So think how simple this sentence is. They use mucus to create a small raft of tiny air bubbles permanently attached to the bottom of their bodies, which makes them buoyant. When you're buoyant, it means you float. So the simple correct answer here is J, 248. Okay. In 2011, University of Michigan graduate student Celia Churchill published a paper that explains how the bubble rafters' incredible way of life evolved. Churchill and her team began their research by analyzing and comparing the DNA of several snail families, determining the ancestral lineage of bubble rafting snails. Okay. You already have an ing, right? And by analyzing and comparing, you don't want to have another ing follows it directly, right? An ing clause followed by an ing clause. So what you need here is what we call an infinitive. Okay, meaning like to go, to eat, to smile, analyzing several snail families to determine. Okay, that's what should be right here instead of determining. To determine, why did they do the analyzing? To determine the ancestral lineage of bubble rafting snails. So the right answer to 49 is D. Okay, and appreciate that. You already got an ing here. You don't want to follow it up by another ing. Okay. Churchill, who found in her surprise that bubble rafters are most genetically similar to Wentel traps. Okay, the construction should not be in her surprise. The expression is found to her surprise. So right away we know this is a wrong preposition, so this is incorrect. So let's see what choices we have. Churchill, who was surprised to find that bubble rafters are most genetically similar to Wentel traps, a snail in the family Epidenidae. Okay. That's not a full sentence, right? It's a sentence fragment. Because you basically, Churchill, all of this is a dependent clause, right? So there's no complete sentence. Where is the verb? There is no verb. So it can't be a complete sentence. Churchill, who found her surprise that bubble rafters are most genetically similar to Wentel traps, a snail, that is not a complete sentence. So you need to substitute something here that'll give you a subject and a verb. Churchill, who is wrong again because it's a dependent clause. Churchill was surprised to find, aha, that is a sentence. Churchill was surprised. Subject, verb. So that's a complete sentence. Churchill found in her surprise, this is incorrect, to her surprise, okay? So you would not, you don't find something in your surprise, you find it to your surprise. So the right answer here to 50 is H, because it is a complete sentence. And the sentence essentially is Churchill was surprised to find that bubble raptors are most genetically, we'll look at 51 next, similar to Wentel traps, a snail in the family Epidenidae. That's a complete sentence. So you must have a subject and a verb. All right. Okay. Similar is the word here. Genetically similar to Wentel traps. So let's see if that's correct or if we need to substitute something. This seems correct to me as it is. Genetically comparing, that doesn't say similar, right? That's not the right meaning. Genetically the same, no, they're not identical. Genetically alike to. You cannot be alike to something. You can be similar to something, or you can say two things are alike. But you would never say I am alike to something. You'd say I'm similar to something. So this, as it stands, is correct. So 51, the answer is A, no change. Okay. Lentil traps live on the ocean floor. They are creatures that feed on coral and sea anemones and rarely, if ever, come up to the water surface. Okay. So you got a sense here. This is a comma, by the way. It doesn't look like it, but it is a comma. Okay. So you've got lentil traps live on the ocean floor, comma. They are creatures that feed on coral and sea anemones, comma. Okay, so this is a complete sentence. This is a complete sentence. So you've got two complete sentences with a comma separating them. So this is a run-on sentence. You should have a period here and then start a new sentence and have a period there. So this can't be right. We need a dependent clause that's going to connect all of this. Now, here I want to point out, Wentel traps live on the ocean floor, comma. Look at this, feeding on coral and sea anemones, and rarely, if ever, come up to the water surface. So this is a dependent clause that basically modifies what Wentel traps do. Wentel traps live on the ocean floor, comma, feeding on coral and sea anemones, comma, and rarely, if ever, come up to the water surface. So this dependent clause makes this into a complete sentence, not two sentences or three sentences, okay? And it's grammatically correct. So the right answer to 52 is J, feeding, okay? Now let's move on. These snails use mucus to bind their eggs together into long strands or egg masses that trail behind them as they glide. Now, if the strands were different from the egg masses, if you said, do you want a burger or do you want a chicken sandwich? If they're distinct, then you don't need to use any punctuation here. But what's happening here is another word for strands is egg masses. So you do need to separate this out into long strands, comma, or egg masses. In other words, we're giving you a different name for the same thing. The trail behind them as they glide across the ocean floor. So what I would expect here is a comma here and here. There it is, or egg masses. Because again, this is restating that. It's the same thing, and you have to separate a restatement by commas. These are not two different things, they're the same thing. So you'd put a comma here and a comma there. The trail behind them. So the right answer to this is 53 would be C. Okay. Churchill asserts that is the genetic precursor to the bubble rafts. That is, Churchill asserts that these egg masses are the genetic precursor to the bubble rafts. You need to be much more specific here, right? You can't You can't just say that is. You have to say that these egg masses are precursors to the bubble wrap. You're talking specifically about what you said in the previous sentence. You need to identify what it is. Okay, so the answer to 54 has to be G, because the rest of them are hopelessly vague. Okay, Churchill asserts that these egg masses are precursors to the bubble rafts, genetic precursor to the bubble raft. According to the biologist, air often gets trapped in the egg masses of female Wentel traps, forming small air bubbles. At one point, a Wentel trap must have created enough bubbles to cause her to float to the ocean's surface. Okay, so that makes perfect sense. Given the abundance of jellyfish and other foods on the surface, creating air bubbles and floating becomes a survival advantage. Okay. Do you really need to say all this again? We know that she's floated already to the surface. So what we're doing here is just repeating ourselves. So let's see what we can put here that would be a lot more precise and a lot more succinct without adding all kinds of extra verbiage, extra words that we don't need that are essentially redundant, right? We don't want to say the same thing over and over again. Okay. So what would we say here? Let's take a look at what they've got. The abundance of jellyfish and other foods on they all say surface, creating air bubbles, surface creating air bubbles. Okay. Given the abundance of jellyfish and other foods on the surface, comma, creating air bubbles became a survival advantage. So, comma, dependent clause, given, starting with given, dependent clause, given the abundance of jellyfish and other foods on the surface, comma, the subject of this sentence is creating air bubbles. Okay? Creating air bubbles became, this act of creating air bubbles is a noun, and this is the verb to that noun, became a survival advantage. Okay? So what you want to do is separate out the dependent clause that begins with given, with a comma, get rid of the floating because we already know she's floating. Creating air bubbles became a survival advantage. So the right answer here to 55 is C. Okay? And this functions as a subject, interestingly enough, in this sentence. Although you wouldn't know it unless you really thought about it. Okay. It became a 56 survival advantage. That makes perfect sense. This grammar is correct. What do they want to do? Benefit for the fulfillment of what a Wentel trap needs to survive. Come on, man. That's ridiculously wordy. Beneficiary element in terms of staying alive. We don't even know what that means. It's not even grammatically correct. Means to the end that is nourishment. Again, nowhere near the point. The point is it's a survival advantage. Okay, because there's a lot of food up there, so if they can float, they can find food more easily, which makes that a survival advantage. So the right answer to 56 is no change. Churchill argues that though the ability to make bubbles on purpose didn't evolve quickly, okay, let's look at this first. Though the ability to make bubbles on purpose. This seems grammatically correct to me, right, at 57? But let's see what they substitute, okay, for 57. Though the progression through time that led to making bubbles, again, all of this is unnecessary. Ability takes the place of all these words. Leap for science, that doesn't have anything to do with the snail. The snail doesn't care about a leap for science. Gifted talent to make, no, that's silly. So Churchill argues that though the ability to make bubbles on purpose didn't evolve quickly, that is perfectly correct. So the right answer to 57 is no change. Okay, you already have a qualifier here, though. Now you're putting another qualifier in while. Okay, so this needs to be separated by a comma, but you don't need another qualifier. You're still responding to this. Though they have no money, comma, they still would like to eat. All right. So though the ability to make bubbles didn't evolve quickly, comma, you don't need this while here. It's completely wrong. So let's look at the changes. However, certain, again, this is a modifier. You already have one with though. Again, you already have one with though. The only right answer is to delete the underlined portion. Churchill argues that though the ability to make bubbles on purpose didn't evolve quickly, certain lineages of Wendell traps did develop this habit, period. That's all you need. Get this thing out of there. Okay, so the right answer to 58 is delete the underlined portion. These exceptional snails give rise to the handful of bubble rafting snail species known today. Churchill, in explaining how a few bottom-feeding Wendell traps became janthenids skimming the ocean surface, has answered the question of how some snails became surfers. Okay, that's 59. Has answered the question of how some snails. So Churchill, all of this is a dependent clause. Just put it in parentheses or just take it out. Churchill has answered. That's the verb, past tense. Churchill's the subject, has answered the question. What question? Of how some snails become surfers. This sounds perfectly correct. So let's see what she has here. Churchill has offered an unknown about snails and surfing and a provided explanation. That doesn't tell you anything, right, about the lineage and how they became floaters. So that's wrong. Given an answer to a question relating biologically to, again, non-specific. Doesn't tell you. Done something about snails. Incredibly non-specific. Way too general. So how some snails become surfers is a specific thing that she's answering. So none of these will do. The only right answer is what's there right now. So 59 is no change. Okay. Now 60 is about where you place an extra sentence. The writer is considering adding the following sentence to the essay. Eventually, snails evolved that would use mucus to build small rafts of air bubbles on which they could float to the surface of the ocean to feed. Okay. So it has to be something about air bubbles and mucus. This sentence has to follow some mention of air bubbles and mucus, okay? So let's go back to the passage and we can see if we can find point A. Here we go. The bubble rafting snails feeding on jellyfish and other floating prey. Okay, if you put it here, eventually snails evolved that would use mucus to build small rafts of air bubbles on which they could float to the surface of the ocean to feed. Okay. It doesn't make any sense because you're already talking about the current floating snails. So to say eventually makes no sense in terms of time sequence, right? Because you're already saying these guys are drifting, they're floating. So this is incorrect, okay? And then we go down to B. Churchill and her team began their research, analyzing, comparing DNA, the ancestral lineage of bubble snails. Now, if you stick it in here, it says eventually snails evolved that would use mucus. Churchill found to her surprise that bubble rafters are most generally similar to one. Okay, that sentence doesn't belong here because you haven't told the story yet about how these Wendell traps gradually evolved. So it's incorrect here. It's in the wrong place. Then you go to C. If I can find C. Here's D. Where is C? There it is. Okay. Okay, you're still talking about them living on the floor. They haven't been gone through their transition yet. So that added sentence would make no sense there. So now we go to D, where obviously is correct. Churchill argues that though the ability to make bubbles on purpose didn't evolve quickly, certain lineages of Wendell traps did develop this habit of making bubbles. Eventually, snails evolved that would use mucus to build small rafts of air bubbles, which they could float to the surface of the ocean to feed. These exceptional snails gave rise to the bubble rafting snails. So it's a perfect transition here, okay? Because now you're talking about the evolution of the bubble float, and then you say that eventually snails evolved that could use this to feed on the surface, and that these were exceptional snails that became named janthenids. So The right answer to 60 is D. That's where that goes. Okay? Because it has to make sense where you stick it. All right, now we move on to the long passage, which is a reading comprehension about sperm whales, one of the most mysterious whales out there and a very interesting creature. This passage is adapted from the article Call of the Leviathan. A leviathan is a whale. In 1839, in the first scientific treatise on the sperm whale, Thomas Beale, a surgeon aboard a whaler, wrote that it was one of the most noiseless of marine animals. While they do not sing elaborate songs like humpbacks or belugas, in fact, they are not silent. Whalers in the 1800s spoke of hearing loud knocking, almost like hammering on a ship's hull, whenever sperm whales were present. Only in 1957 did two scientists from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution confirm the sailors' observations. Aboard a research vessel, the Atlantis, they approached 5 sperm whales, shut off the ship's motors, and listened with an underwater receiver. At first, they assumed the muffled smashing noise they heard came from somewhere on the ship. Then they determined the sounds were coming from the whales. So the sperm whale makes a noise almost like a hammering, like a clicking. It doesn't sing or whine the way other whales do. It's very distinct. And a whaler is somebody that in the old days would go hunting whales. They hunted them for their blubber and for their spermaceti oil, which they used in lamps and for other purposes as a lubricant and so on. Remember, this is before fossil fuels, so the whaling industry was huge. Biologists now believe that the sperm whale's massive head functions like a powerful telegraph machine, emitting pulses of sound in distinct patterns, so they communicate with these clicks. At the front of the head are the spermaceti organ, a cavity that contains the bulk of the whale's spermaceti and a mass of oil-saturated fatty tissue. So you think of it as olive oil. 2 long nasal passages branch away from the bony nares of the skull, twining around the spermaceti organ and the fatty tissue. The left nasal passage, it's basically a channel, right, runs directly to the blowhole on the top of the whale's head. But the other twists and turns, flattens and broadens, forming a number of air-filled sacs capable of reflecting sound. Near the front of the head sit a pair of clappers called monkey lips. So he's giving you a description of the apparatus, the organs inside the sperm whale's head that will generate this clicking sound. Sound generation is a complex process. To make its clicking sounds, a whale forces air through the right nasal passage to the monkey lips, which clap shut. The resulting click bounces off one air-filled sac and travels back through the spermaceti organ to another sac nestled against the skull. From there, the click is sent forward through the fatty tissue and amplified out into the watery world. So it's a very complicated process to create these clicks. Sperm whales may be able to manipulate the shape of both the spermaceti organ and the fatty tissue, possibly allowing them to aim their clicks in a certain direction. Okay, so these clicks are the sound generated in the head of the sperm whale they're transmitted through the water like sonar waves. And that's what the sailors were hearing when they turned off the motors and listened. Biologist Dr. Hal Whitehead has identified 4 patterns of clicks. The most common clicks are used for long-range sonar, in other words, identifying prey that's far away. They feed on squid, so the long-range sonar can tell them where there might be a school of squid. So-called creaks is a second type. They sound like a squeaky door. They're used for close-range sonar when the prey is close by, so they can localize it even more. Slow clicks, that's the third type, are made only by large males, but no one knows precisely what they signify. And then you see here is a quotation, probably something to do with mating, close quote, White House guesses. So the expert is saying that those slow clicks in the males might have something to do with attracting a mate. Finally, codas are distinct patterns of clicks most often heard when whales are socializing. So this is how they talk to each other. The rest of these clicks have a specific purpose, either hunting or mating. but this is how they socialize with the codas. Codas are of particular interest. Whitehead has found that different groups of sperm whales called vocal clans, clan being an extended family, consistently use different sets. The repertoire of codas the clan uses is its dialect. Vocal clans can be huge, thousands of individuals spread out over thousands of miles of ocean. Clan members are not necessarily related. Rather, many smaller, durable, matrilineal units make up clans, and different clans have their own specific ways of behaving. A matrilineal unit is a unit that's held together by the mother. Mother to daughter, keeps the group together. It's not patrilineal. It's not based on the father. It's based on the mother, the consistent identity of that unit. Now, the other thing to remember is that these codas are dialects. So in Spain, they speak Spanish, but it's different from Mexican Spanish, which is different from Cuban Spanish, which is different from Puerto Rican Spanish. So those are the dialects, right? So the sperm whale has a language of clicks, but these different clans speak a different dialect of that language, just the way people who live in different parts of the world speak Spanish very differently. Okay. A recent study in animal behavior took the specialization of codas a step further. Not only do clans use different codas, the authors argued, but the codas differ slightly among individuals. So everybody's accent is a little bit different. If you have a group of whales, no two whales speak the same. They could be, in effect, unique identifiers, or we call their names, who they are as individuals. Whitehead cautions that a full understanding of codas is still a long way off. Even so, he believes differences represent cultural variance among the clans, just like we have among people. Think of culture as information that is transmitted socially between groups. You can make predictions about where it will arise in complex societies, richly modulated among individuals that form self-contained communities. Just the way human beings migrate to a particular place and then the language evolves and it becomes just a little bit different. It's the same with the sperm whale. That sounds to him a lot like sperm whale society. But most of sperm whales clicking, if not most of its life, is devoted to one thing, finding food. So this is the sonar where they locate their prey. And in the Sea of Cortez, which is down near Mexico, the focus of its attention is Dosidicus gigas, also known as the jumbo squid. So they eat a lot of squid. If you open a sperm whale's stomach, you will find the skeletons of thousands and thousands of squid. Okay, and they don't have a big skeleton because their bodies are mostly soft tissue. It's their beak. Their beak is the only thing that you find in the sperm whale's stomach because it's the only thing that's not digestible. Okay. So the most celebrated natural antagonism between sperm whales and squid almost certainly involves the jumbo squid's larger cousin, the giant squid, a species that grows to 65 feet long. So the giant squid can fight back because it's big enough to fight back. The relationship between sperm whales and squid is pretty dramatic. A single sperm whale can eat more than 1 ton of squid per day, 2,000 pounds of squid per day. They do eat giant squid on occasion, but most of what whales pursue is relatively small and overmatched. So they don't want to take on the giant squids too often because they could get hurt. With their clicks, sperm whales can detect a squid less than a foot long, more than a mile away. How about that for sonar? And schools of squid from even farther away. But the way the sperm whales find squid was until recently a puzzle. So they're using 2 types of sonar, long-range sonar to locate maybe a group of squid or a squid, and then short-range sonar to actually precisely identify where they are so they can feed on the squid, they can swallow it. Okay. So now we go to the questions. The main purpose of the passage is to describe how sperm whales use clicks to hunt their prey, evaluate historical theories regarding sperm whale clicks, provide details about the antagonism between sperm whales and squid, Explain how sperm whales generate and use clicks. So the most comprehensive answer is D. Explain how sperm whales generate. Remember, they use 2 paragraphs to tell you that, and to go into how they use their clicks socially, with codas, maybe with mating, with hunting. So this is the most comprehensive answer and best fits what this essay's purpose is, okay? So the right answer to 31 is D. In the 8th paragraph, lines 74 through 77, the passage begins to focus on the relationship between most of the sperm whale's clicking is devoted to the squid. So the relationship between the sperm whale and the squid. So let's find it. Squid and sperm whales, there it is. So the right answer to 32 is J, squid and sperm whales. Okay, question 33. The main purpose of the 2nd paragraph, lines 17 through 30. Let's go down and take a look at the 2nd paragraph. Biologists now believe the sperm whale's massive head functions like a powerful telegraph. So it goes through now all the anatomy, right? And how the anatomy can generate sound. So let's see what choices we have. Compare sperm whales to telegraph machines. Explain the function of the spermaceti organ. Outline how scientists came to understand the anatomy of the sperm whale. Describe the sperm whale anatomy involved in creating sound. So C, it doesn't tell you how the scientists figured out what the anatomy was. So that's why C is wrong. How they came to understand it doesn't explain that. All it does do is describe the sperm whale's anatomy as it is known, involved in creating sound. So the right answer to 33 is D. 34. It can reasonably be inferred or concluded from the passage that codas are of particular interest because scientists don't yet fully understand how codas help sperm whales hunt, how codas function in sperm whale socialization. Remember, they said it was for social groups. Why codas are emitted only by male whales, which is not true. Why codas are so difficult to detect, not true. So it's a socialization. That's what the coda clicks are. So the right answer to 34 has to be G. As it is presented in the passage, the study that appeared in Animal Behavior concluded that sperm whale vocal glands. So let's go back and look at Animal Behavior. There should be here we go. A recent study in animal behavior took the specialization of codas a step further. Not only do clans use different codas, the authors argued, but the codas differ slightly among individuals. Okay, so now we look at 35. The passage concluded that sperm whale vocal clans each use a distinct dialect, and individuals within each clan can have unique codas. Well, that looks correct to me. Right? Not only do you have clans with specific codas, but that individuals are different in terms of their codas. So A, right away, is the right answer. Can adopt the codas of other clans? No, it doesn't say that. Each use many dialects? It doesn't say that. Can adopt the codas of other clans? Doesn't say that. So B, C, and D are clearly wrong. A is the correct answer. Okay. Individual clans can have a specific coda or dialect, and then individuals within that clan can have variations on the coda. The passage indicates that compared to the sounds beluga whales and humpback whales make, the sounds sperm whales make are, remember, beluga whales make like a singing sound, and humpback whales make that kind of whining sound. It's almost musical, right? But the sperm whale is just making a click. So are they more complex and varied? Are they more frequent and melodic? Are they less elaborate and song-like? Are they less enigmatic, meaning confusing and repetitive? They're less elaborate and song-like. Instead of the melodies that the beluga whale gives you, they are just clicks, right? So they're much less song-like. So the right answer to 36 is H. Okay, according to the passage, who confirmed the observation that sperm whales make loud knocking noises? Well, it was the Woods Hole scientists, right? In 1957, they turned off the motor. If you go back and look at that passage, 1957, 2 scientists, okay, aboard, they made observations and they listened, right? And they determined the sounds were coming from the whales. So the right answer should be Woods Hole scientists. There we go. So 37 should be C. 38, as it is used in line 25, the word runs most nearly means, so let's see what line 25 has to offer. The left nasal passage runs directly to the blowhole. So it basically follows a path or goes to, so let's see what the choices are. Leads, there it is. So it leads to the blowhole. Goes from the nares, from the left nary to right to the blowhole. So it leads to the blowhole. So the right answer to 38 is J. And 39, based on the passage, the notion that slow clicks are related to sperm whale mating behavior is best described as a fact. No, that they're just guessing, really. It's just an educated guess. A fact, no, that's got to be wrong. Reasoned judgment from an expert in biology, reasoned judgment from the passage author. So remember, he had it in parentheses and he was quoting Whitehead. Right here. Parentheses, probably something to do with mating, Whitehead guesses. So Whitehead's the expert. So what we're doing is, it's a reasoned judgment from the expert. So 39 is C. It's not a fact because they don't know it yet. Which of the following statements about the mystery of how sperm whales locate squid is best supported by the passage? The mystery was solved in the 1800s. That's definitely not true. The mystery was solved recently. Yeah, probably. The mystery is likely to be solved in the near future. No, we already know that they use their certain types of clicks for long and short range sonar. So we already have the answer. It definitely didn't happen in the 1800s. It's not going to happen in the future because it already happened. The mystery is likely to remain unsolved. No, it's not unsolved. So then the right answer is recently they figured it out. So the right answer to 40 is G. Okay. All right, we're done with a long passage, and now we're going to move on to our vocabulary section. And let's share the screen here with our vocabulary words. And there we go. If I can get this to come up a little bit. Okay, so our first word tonight is treatise. Can anyone tell me what a treatise is? Anybody? Okay, so it's a written work, something written, dealing very, very comprehensively, very formally, very systematically, very carefully with a specific subject. It's not a short note. It's not a mild passage. A treatise is a big piece of work, big piece of academic work. And you're putting forth a lot of information dealing with a specific subject. That's what a treatise is. So you could write a treatise on communism, or you could write a treatise on the criminally insane. So any subject that you pick, it's if you approach it as a large subject and very detailed, that's a treatise. Okay, what's a beluga? So feel free to guess. We talked about belugas. What kind of animal is a beluga? Is it a giraffe? Is it a rhinoceros? What kind of animal is a beluga? It's a whale, right? Beluga whale. It's a small white whale. It lives in the Arctic coastal waters, like off the coast of Alaska. Okay, and they're very cute. They're little whales. They're not very large, but apparently they're very charming. And the baby belugas are especially cute. The other thing you should know is that beluga is another word for a sturgeon, which is a fish that lives in the rivers of Russia. It's a giant sturgeon, and that's what when they refer to beluga caviar are the fish eggs of those sturgeon. So even though when you say beluga, most people think of whales, there is a sturgeon, which is a fish that is called a beluga, and beluga caviar are the eggs of that fish. And basically the best beluga caviar comes from Russia, where these sturgeons is their native environment. Okay. Spermaceti. What is spermaceti? Spermaceti is what's inside the head of the sperm whale. A white, waxy substance It plays a role in helping the whale to stay up on the top of the water. It plays a role in creating the clicks or the sounds. And it was prized because they would use spermaceti to make ointments, for health reasons, to make candles, to make lubricants for machinery. So spermaceti was a very valuable thing, and that's why the whaling industry for a couple of 100 years was a huge industry that brought in a lot of money. It also killed a lot of whales, a lot of sperm whales specifically. Okay, what's a nair? A nair is the singular of nares. Nares is Nares. It means both nostrils. So a nair is one nostril. Okay, and that's all it means. So you have two nostrils, and you have one nostril on either side, or one nair on either side. Okay, codas. Now, a coda in sperm language is the socializing clicking, right? But in every other context, when you use the word coda, it's a concluding passage of a piece of music or a dance. So anyone that plays an instrument, you'll see a work of art at the end. Sometimes you'll see a coda, which is like an add-on at the end of a longer musical piece. Okay, and it comes at the very end, and it concludes the piece. And that's what they call a coda. And anyone that is familiar with music is familiar with that term. Matrilineal, we talked about this, based on kinship with the mother, coming from the female line, mother to daughter to mother to daughter to mother to daughter, and so on. As opposed to patrilineal, where you trace the family through the father's line. Okay? So matriarch is the same root, it means mother, and lineal is the line of the mother, matrilineal. Fallacious. Fallacious comes from the same root as the word false. Something that's fallacious is mistaken, it's false, it's untrue. Fallacious. So you can say his theory about what creates tidal changes in the ocean was fallacious. It was incorrect. Okay. Fatuous. Fatuous is kind of an insult. It means silly, pointless, foolish. He was such a fatuous boy, such a silly boy, just a dumb kid, just a fatuous boy. So it's not a very pleasant thing to say about someone. Fetter. So it's a chain. I am in fetters. I am in chains. I have restraints on my arms, also known as a manacle, because the mana it means hand. So the binding of your hands. So a chain or a manacle or a restraint, creating a prisoner. Also, you could call them shackles. There's a lot of words for things that will hold you and keep you from moving. And that's what a fetter is. If you're unfettered, that means you're free. And you can use that metaphorically. You could say something like, now that I'm out of Mrs. Jones's class, I'm unfettered by her constant demanding for homework. I'm free of it. I'm unfettered. Okay, flagrant. Flagrant comes from basically fire. Something that is extremely obvious, very offensive, very conspicuous, very blatant. Everybody can see it easily. It's flagrant. And usually it's something bad. So let's say he was a flagrant womanizer. Everybody knew that he cheated on his wife. Flagrant. Everybody knew it. And it was a bad thing. Okay? So that's how you use flagrant. Now, our two words for the day today are spermaceti, which is an interesting word, and coda. And I'll explain to you why it's interesting. So spermaceti is Latin, and it comes from the root sperma in Latin, which means seed or sperm, because this substance in the head of the whale, of the sperm whale, looked like sperm. It looked like semen. So they called it sperm. Aceti. Now, the Latin for whale is cetus. So seti comes from cetus, which meant whale. So it's the sperm of the whale. That's how the whale got its name, the sperm whale. Because this substance resembled sperm, it resembled semen, and it came from a whale. So you put the two words together and you get spermaceti. Okay? And cetology, cetology, cetology is the study of whales. Okay, so it comes from that same Latin root, cetus, which means whale. So that's a compound word. Okay, the next word is a very simple one, but it's an interesting one, coda. So where does coda come from? Okay, the coda is, forget about sperm whales. A coda comes at the end of a piece of music. It's the end, right? It's also could be the end of a dance, particular dance, the coda, okay? It comes from the Latin cauda, C-A-U-D-A, which means the tail of an animal. So when an animal passes by you, what comes last? The tail. So cauda somehow evolved into coda and then became representative of the end of a piece of music or the end of a dance. Okay? There's another common term in medicine. I wonder if I can write. Can I write? No. Anyway, in medicine, there's a term called cauda equina. And it's C-A-U-D-A, cauda, new word, equina, E-Q-U-I-N-A, cauda equina. The cauda equina literally in Latin means the tail of the horse. Equus in Latin is horse, and cauda is tail. So the tail of the horse. But in medicine, the cauda equina is the place where the spinal cord runs down to the lumbar level, and at a certain point, the spinal cord breaks out into multiple individual nerves, all bunched together, going their separate ways down through the different foramen. And that bunch of individual nerves looks like a horse's tail. So when you look at an anatomical section or an MRI of a spinal cord, you'll see a single thick rope down to the level of L2, which is the second lumbar vertebra, at which point it will break into a bunch of individual smaller nerves that look like a horse's tail. And so in medicine, we call that part of the spine the cauda equina, the tail of the horse. Okay? And you can look it up. You can just look up cauda equina and you'll see a picture of it. Okay, guys, anybody have any questions? All right, thank you so much, and we'll see you January 9th. Have a great holiday. All right? Everybody enjoy yourselves.